Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I'll be here today with Safeena to discuss about secure posture enhancement with some of the new capabilities we have, but also to highlight some of the things we already have in place that you can leverage to continuous improvement of your secure score, your governance. It's a mix of everything. My name is Diogenes. I'm a principal PM manager of the CXE team, and excited for the presentation today. So let's get started here with the main question, which is why secure hygiene is imperative. This is very important, and I always like to start the conversation talking about this because things are just continue to get more complex. And in some recent survey, IT professional expressed that there's many tools to manage secure posture across different workloads. And with multi-cloud, this trend only continues to grow. We see that in different reports across the industry that secure posture management is the #1 priority. And it's something that a lot of people don't do actually because it's a proactive work. It's a work that takes time and there's a lot of challenge. So we are here today to talk about those challenges and how to overcome those with Defender for Cloud. This latest article here from April this year is a great example of an incident, a ransomware incident that ended up being investigated. And what happened was the lack of cybersecurity hygiene was the main cause for this. And as you can see here, the result of that was a big fine that the company had to pay for not having implemented the right security measures in the first place. So it becomes also a risk from the financial perspective, not only the data that can get compromised, but also not being diligent and do the things that you need to do to improve your secure posture. So you have to look at this in a different approach, not only, okay, I'm going to check mark things, but looking at different dimensions, how this is going to affect my data, but how this is going to affect the reputation of the company and potential fines. The advantage of a product such as Defender for Cloud is that we look across different angles to the life cycle of the data, the life cycle of the posture management. If you look at the first pillar, for example, posture management is about proactive measures, protection. In other words, you ensuring that you are doing the work that you need to do. So you're going to do the secure hygiene of your workloads, but not only the workloads that are in Azure, because if you are in a multi-cloud, you're going to have to look at the secure hygiene of other workloads that are in AWS or GCP as well. And on-premise, let's not forget that the majority of the companies, they still have resources on-premise, and you want to have a single visibility across the different locations where the data and the workloads are located, right? So you need to ensure that you're doing this homework, you are doing the secure hygiene of all workloads, you have cross cloud visibility, and then you have to have an action plan and have to have tools in place for detection. And detection is basically workload protection. So protection, detection. Now you have threat detections that were tailored exclusively for that workload. A lot of customers, as they move to the cloud, they try to inherit some of the detections that they have in place for on-premise, but it's not really applicable because those threat detections, they were not built with cloud in mind. They were not built based on the threat detections for the workload. For example, if you are trying to protect a storage account, the threat landscape for a storage account is completely different from a threat landscape of a container of a VM. So our research team, when they create those analytics, they are creating analytics that are specific to the threat detection of those workloads. And of course, after detect, you have to respond. So protection, detection, and response. So the response is the investigation, the remediation. And this is a life cycle because as you respond to potential compromise, you're going to learn with that experience, and you have to incorporate this learning back to the posture management. So let's say, for example, that you just identify that some storage accounts were completely exposed to the internet, and that's how the threat actor gained access to the storage account. Well, you're going to learn with this experience because you have a threat detection that alerts you and you're going to respond fast. Now it's time to go back to the posture manager and say, hey, let's make sure that we are not even allowing people to provision things that are not secured by default. And that leads us to the challenge that we have, right? And let's go for this initial scenario. Let's say that Bob is the workload owner, is working in the subscription for the company, and he provisions a new storage account. Well, this company does not have any guardrails in place to allow or to prohibit Bob from provisioning things that are not secure. So there is nothing from the governance perspective of the cloud. And it's very important to open a parenthesis here to say customers and companies that are not very mature on their journey to the cloud, they really do not have those guardrails in place. You only see those guardrails in place when the company is very mature and is already shifting left to enable the prevention of workloads being provisioning that are not secured by default. So that at that point on, the resources provisioning. So Defender for Cloud is going to continuously scan the resources that you have and will trigger recommendations accordingly. In this case, the storage account that Bob provisioned has a bunch of recommendations that should be in place because the storage account is not secured by default. So you got to think about, okay, how can I mitigate those things even before Bob provision? And that's something that Safeena is going to cover later. But just to give a visibility, this is one challenge, governance. The other challenge comes into play because now the secure posture management team is looking at the Defender for Cloud dashboard and see all those recommendations. And now I have things to do here to remediate. But guess what? When I try to remediate, I don't have privilege. Well, I don't have privilege because I do not own that workload. So that's a very common problem. So the question is, who's the owner for that workload? So now we have the secure posture management team try to improve their secure posture by remediating recommendations that they don't have privilege. So we need to close that loop. We need to understand who's the owner. We need to delegate someone to address that, and that's when it comes to the governance capability. So that's the main challenge. And so in summary, what we say is lack of Azure governance enable users to provision resources that are not secure by default. So you have to look at the governance from the cloud perspective. If the secure posture management team is not working closely with the cloud team, sometimes there are two different teams because one is more from the secure standpoint and the other one is more from the governance of the infrastructure. If those two teams are not working together, you see more and more cases like that. The secure posture management team doesn't have the privilege to remediate the workload, which is a very common scenario in cloud computing because it's decentralized. The workload owner is the one that provision the resource and have access to remediate those recommendations. And the workload owners, they do not have visibility on the secure state of their workloads because they really are not secure professionals and they don't really know a lot. So when you talk about improvement of secure posture, is really an exercise that involves the entire company. You should even think about provide workload owners a basic training to enable them to visit the Defender for Cloud dashboard with a reader permission to see the state of the resources. We also have baked into the workload itself blades that gives visibility. So for example, when you go to a storage account, there's a secured option there. When you click, that secure option is actually retrieve the information from the Defender for Cloud. That gives the workload owner the visibility that he needs about security, but he needs to have some basic training, right? So it's very important that. So, and the challenge also is if you start utilizing the secure score as your KPI for secure posture improvement over time, you see that every time that a new resource is provisioned and this resource is not secure by default, the secure score is going to drop. So you're going to have some constant drops along the way, as you can see here, right? This is an example of some drops throughout the life cycle, and some of those drops are really a pattern. Every month you see that. What is that? Well, there's something called Patch Tuesday, right? That every month hits in, and now you have system updates to apply. if you don't apply in time, you're going to see that drop on secure score. So it's a challenge to not only to grow and improve the posture, but to stay there. And the only way to stay there is to resolve the first item, which is the governance of your cloud computing as a whole, as an infrastructure. So let's go through a demo to talk a little bit about some of these capabilities. One of the things that I want to remind you is that we had a great presentation last week about the last updates, from the last 3 months delivered by Dick and Vasavi. They did an outstanding job demoing some of these capabilities, mainly the governance. So I will refer to that demo. I will briefly touch on governance, but I want you to take a look on the big picture. And everything starts in the recommendation. If you are looking at secure posture management, you always have to look at, okay, what are the things that I need to do it here? One feature that will help you to expedite this is the governance, because the governance will allow you to assign ownership, right? You're going to be able to say, okay, these recommendations, I'm going to create a new campaign and assign to someone to remediate. So this is something that you will see on the dashboard in multiple locations. As you can see here, the governance is already created here, and it tells me the overdue recommendations, the unassigned recommendations. So it gives me some visibility about this aspect. Okay, if I have all these unassigned recommendations, then I need to improve my governance and start to assign tasks to people to remediate. And you do that via the environment settings. You select the subscription that you want, and from that you will go to the governance rules, which currently is in public preview. And you basically create a rule, okay, based on that. So if I open one rule that is already created here, I have the information about the rule ID, the rule name. I can organize by severity, or I can also specify the recommendations that I want to work on. For example, let's say that you want to create a campaign to address all the recommendations that are related to the storage account, because you want to assign all storage account related recommendation to one person to take care, right? So you can assign this to one individual, or you can also use tags. So you can organize this campaign based on tags, okay? And this is a good approach if you using tag to tag departments within your company, right? So you can have tags that are related to the financial department or the HR, whatever the case might be. You can give a time frame for the remediation. That's very important, because that's the whole point of accountability. You have 30 days to remediate that. Otherwise, your manager will be informed anyway, because I have the option here to notify the manager. Not only the person will receive a reminder, but the managers, that person's manager will also receive a reminder via email to say, hey, this person has some open recommendations to address. So this is a very powerful capability for that. One thing that we also acknowledge is that sometimes teams, they need more time to work on remediations. So that's why we have the grace period here, because if you apply the grace period, the secure score, it will not change as we are working to remediate those recommendations. So that's a very powerful capability that helps you to organize. And once you finish this, you're actually going to be able to have a very nice report showing this visualization about which recommendations were completed, which ones are overdue, and then you can dig in and start doing more follow-ups to better understand why things are still open. But it's about accountability. Someone needs to be accountable, and you need to be able to track that. That's what the governance feature is about. Now, from the regular perspective, let's say, okay, now that I see that I have governances in place, how can I track progress over time? How can I track to see if things are actually moving to the right direction? So we continue to invest on workbooks. Workbooks is something that we are adding more and more. And one very popular workbook is the Secure Score Overtime, because it allows us to have this big picture about how we are making this progress. Are we going in a good trend? So, well, looks like we are going in a good trend, not only for the past 7 days, but also for the past 30 days. So this is really good. This graph here show a different perspective because, yeah, we are doing okay last 30 days, but we are not really evolving over months. So we need to do something about it. And when you have a big dip, you are able to narrow here and look deeply on that to understand, okay, so why we have that dip? What really happened? Oh, looks like all these recommendations suddenly got unhealthy. So let's dig in and understand why. So you have here the why. Oh, the resource was removed. Something happened, right? So you can click on view and can you start tracking that to understand. So this workbook is extremely popular. It requires you to be using continuous export feature so that the information is available on the workspace. But it's very important for you to start tracking these chains, not only to look for progress, but to analyze patterns. Maybe something is happening every month that is causing your secure score to drop. And with that, your secure posture lower the level compared to 30 days ago. So you have to use that for overtime monitoring. Now, as far as campaigns, while you have the governance, which is a great way for you to create those campaigns and look and assign things, there is also what they call out-of-band campaigns. And I've seen a lot of customers doing that. Okay, this is the month where we're going to create a secure awareness campaign across all teams. And we want to remediate all recommendations that are part of the initial phase of the MITRE framework. What is that? Well, we add here a capability for you to address and to visualize recommendations based on MITRE attack framework, which has been historically utilized by Defender for Cloud and even Security Center before from the threat detection perspective, because we mapped all the alerts according to the MITRE tactics. And it's great because you understand where the threat actor is in a point of time of that attack. But with looking at a proactive manner, we are able to map the recommendations so that you can be proactive. In other words, if I create a campaign to remediate everything related to the initial access, now I can look across all my clouds, because here I have Azure, AWS, and GCP, and I can look at things across the different cloud providers and say, okay, which recommendations are we looking at here that are mapped to the initial phase? You want to remediate those first if you want to break the chain, the cyber queue chain, right? Because the threat actor, if he has no point of entry to your infrastructure, he cannot move on to lateral movement and establish persistency, escalate privilege. He cannot do those things because he was not even able to get into the first place. So that's very important. You have this panel of glass that you can map to the MITRE attack framework, and then you can visualize things in a different perspective. So besides the governance, which is extremely important, make sure to also start taking advantage of the MITRE attack framework mapping, because as you click on each one of these, it will give you very detailed perspective about where it belongs. And it may belong to multiple phases. That's what is really tricky here, because sometimes one recommendation can be utilized by threat actors during the initial phase, as you can see here, or during the execution. It makes total sense because in this case, it's system updates. So system updates can be across different phases, but we do have the mapping here. And with the mapping, you also have access to the article that explains what it does, okay, explains the techniques that are utilized. It gives you a historical perspective about which threat actors are utilizing this. For example, here, APT 19, APT 28, 32, they all utilize these methods, this technique here, drive by compromise, to compromise the system. So we not only give the mapping, but we give the reference for you for further research, and you start taking actions. So that is very important for you to contextualize and start utilizing. Now, the first problem on that list was governance from the infrastructure perspective. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Safeena to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much, Yuri. I hope you can see my screen.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, that's amazing. That was amazing introduction on governance and importance around the same. Now let's talk about Azure policies, how you can use Azure policy to maintain governance. So for the people who are already using Defender for Cloud, you know that Defender for Cloud and Azure policies work hand in hand, right? Azure policies, like you know, helps to enforce if you have any organizational standards and if you want to access compliance at scale. So when you go to Azure Policy pane within the portal, you'll notice that it has its own compliance dashboard, which I'll show to you in a bit. You know, that compliance dashboard will provide you really good aggregated view to evaluate, you know, the overall state of your environment. And it also helps you to give you capabilities to drill down per resource, per policy, granularity, and so on. So with the help of Azure policies, you can enforce policies on your resources in order to set guardrails right from the beginning of the pipeline, development pipeline, and you can make sure that the future configurations will be compliant with your own organizational standards, whatever it may be. Right. And this way you can effectively set guardrails throughout your resources so that you know you can make sure that every resource that is being spinned up in your environment is compliant, and which will also help you to avoid misconfigurations and gives you a really good practice, really good consistent resource governance to start with. And we do have RBAC that I'm sure you know of. You can further use RBAC to define who can access the cloud resources. You can do things like applying a resource lock if you want to prevent accidental deletion of your Azure resources. You can apply tags to your Azure resources to help you know, describe what is the purpose of that particular resources. So basically, the point I'm trying to make here is you are in full control on how your resources are created by using Azure policies. And Azure Blueprint. So for larger organizations, you may need to have to enable governance at scale across multiple subscriptions. In those scenarios, you can use Azure Blueprints. So in summary, Azure Policy will provide you option like allowing you and explicit deny options that it provides you, so that you know on your you can apply that policy on your new and existing resources. And Azure Blueprints is a package, for example, for creating you know a specific set of standards or even requirements that you can use to govern and implement the Azure policies or security and design. We'll not go deep into the blueprints because that's not what today's session is all about. But I want to highlight one last point on the remediation before I take you to the Defender for Cloud recommendations played. You have the capability to automatically remediate in non-compliant resources. So Azure Policy will provide you this capability within that portal so that, you know, if you notice a resource is non-compliant state, you have option to trigger an auto remediation, with the help of which, you know, you can bring your resources into compliance using, you know, we have bulk remediation capability available instead of going through the configuration errors one at a time. Let me take you very quickly to the portal. Here. Now, this is the compliance plate that I was referring to, in which you would be able to see that these are all the resources that are non-compliant in my environment. Now, when I click on any of the non-compliant resource, you will notice that I have this capability that I could create a remediation task with the help of which, I could remediate this particular non-compliant resource, in order to make it compliant, for example, disable public network access. So that's a little bit about the capability that Azure Policy offers. Now, with this knowledge of Azure Policy, I want to show you, how you can apply this powerful feature to the recommendations itself. So I'm sure you all agree that security misconfigurations are major cause of security incidents, right? So Defender for Cloud can help prevent the misconfigurations of your new resources and with regards to the specific recommendations. So for many recommendations that you're seeing here, we offer two modes that you can use to secure the configuration. You will notice that some of the recommendations will have deny effect of Azure Policy. So let me take an example of one of the storage recommendation. Okay. This is just an example, but we have many recommendations that have deny and enforce effect. So to start with the deny effect of Azure Policy, this feature will help you, you can stop unhealthy resources from being created. Say, for example, in this example, you don't want any of your employees to create a storage account which has public access enabled. In those scenarios, I could use this deny effect feature here to prevent the creation of new resources with this misconfiguration. Currently, this option in my subscription, if I click on deny, you will notice that the current state of this of this particular recommendation and for the subscriptions is set to audit. Now, if I choose this checkbox, I have an option called I could change this to deny, and when I do that, it's gonna prevent me create any new resources with this misconfiguration for this subscription. So I could apply this to a subscription level, to multiple subscriptions by clicking on the multiple checkbox here, or to the tenant level as well. Okay, so this is a very powerful capability which will allow me to maintain my governance in my environment and make sure that the resources that are being created in future are secure. Now, I talked about governance, deny, but let me take you to another example of one of the other recommendations that will give you another option, which is enforce. Okay, let me take you to one of the Kubernetes recommendation. Okay, that's only because I like Kubernetes. So if I take this, for example, so here, what this recommendation is telling me is Azure Kubernetes Service Cluster should have the Azure Policy add-on for the Kubernetes installed. So you notice that we have an option that you could apply enforce for this specific recommendation. So now, when you open this recommendation and when you click on enforce, you will notice that the configuration pane opens up with all the policy configuration option. Here you can set the scope, be it at a tenant level or at the subscription level to start with, right? And when you do that, you will select a resource group, which is optional, right? And once you select the scope, you will either define the exclusions or provide the assignment name and the description and make sure that the policy enforcement is enabled, and this will have an option who's assigned this policy and so on. And you can click on next to see all the parameters that is required for this specific policy that I'm creating. Do you want to deploy if not exist, or do you want to disable this particular setting? So you can select the effect based on what you're trying to do with this with the help of this policy. Now, now talking about the remediation. I briefly spoke about remediation task, how you can create a remediation task. Say, for example, this policy, after I've created it, it is coming up as non-compliant. So when I create a remediation task, it will automatically help me remediate this particular non-compliant remediation. And this will work like deploy if not exist effect. You can take advantage of Azure policies, deploy if not exist, and automatically remediate the non-compliant resources upon creation. And that's exactly how it works. And and now this will use either system managed identity or user managed identity, depending on what you are looking to schedule for. And when you click on next, you'll have an option where you can enter a non-compliant message. So this is just so that you help the users understand why a resource is non-compliant with the policy. The message that you type here will be displayed when, for example, me as a user, if I'm trying to create a resource that is denied, and in the evaluation details for any non-compliant resources, it's going to just display this message that it's not allowing me to create because of so and so reason. And I click on next and review and create. So this easy it is to enforce a particular configuration to my environment, so that I could benefit from the governance, and I could make sure that I'm using Azure policies to make sure all the resources that are being created in my environment in future are up to mark and up to what I want. Right. So that's a powerful capability that together with Azure Policies, Defender for Cloud offers. Now, one other option that I wanted to highlight while I'm sharing my screen in the portal is the exempt. We have this another powerful capability called exemption that you can use in order to, for example, if I want to exempt this entire recommendation because I don't want to, for example, create a, I don't want to install Azure Policy add-on for Kubernetes for any reason in my environment. In those scenarios, I could exempt this entire recommendation, either at the management group level or at the subscription level. And if, say, for example, I want to just exempt this particular resource from installing this policy add-on, I could do that as well by just selecting the particular resource and creating the exempt option. So I could apply exemption in different levels, at the recommendation level, at the resource level, or at the at the resource level as well. So that's another powerful capability I wanted to talk about. And one other thing here is view policy definition. Now, if I want to read more about what this policy does, I do have an option to click on view policy definition and read about what are the parameters of this policy to begin with, and where it's going to be affecting, and so on and so forth. I could create a duplicate definition of this policy or assign this policy to a different subscription or a tenant group or so on, and I could play around with the policies as per the need of my organization. So going back to my slide here. So this is an example of what I just showed it to you in the portal, how you can use the powerful feature of Azure Policies for the recommendations. In the documentation, you will see the list of recommendations that we have, the deny and the enforce options that you can use for each recommendation. Now, I'm sure it's pretty clear by now with the help of Yuri's talk, as well as the brief that I talked about. What are the benefits of using governance? But let's recap briefly the benefits of using governance for Azure in general. Security and compliance. So, if you think of it, customers will demand some form of compliance, some form of trust and security, right? And if you want to scale your business, you want that too, right? The compliance, trust, and security. So through governance, resources can be configured consistently to manage security and compliance risk. You don't have to worry about not meeting your company's regulatory compliance if you have this to begin with in your deployment life cycle. Now, consistency is another benefit that I have seen at my customers and experienced the same. So in Azure, you can choose to deploy a wide variety of technologies. You can scale your resources as big as you want, like you know, right? And you can deploy them in whichever region you want. So the fact that you have all of these capabilities doesn't mean that, you have to provide everyone with the ability to use all of them. In fact, you want to focus on, for example, specific technologies and make sure your team deploys them the way that you and your customers expect them to be deployed. So thinking about sizing, location, and role-based access control are some of the things that I have seen that my customers always struggle. And having Azure policies and governance in place, these are the things that you have capability to control with the help of the features that we discussed about. Controlling your costs, like who doesn't want to control the cost, right? So implementing these correct guardrails will make you cost predictable. You know what are you being charged for. You know how your policies are being are working in the back end when a resource is being created, and so on and so forth. Transparency. So you want to be controlling who has access to what and what's running where, and you have the option to control who is using it. Also gives you the possibility to be transparent to your customers. You can show them that you are in control. And finally, you have the capability to adopt new technologies faster. So when you are implementing the rules, you might sound like counterproductive in terms of innovation, but actually the opposite is actually true from my experience. Having the right processes and guardrails in place will help you, give the green light for new technologies much faster. And studies have proven as well that the good governance complements the innovation. So make sure you have good governance with the help of the features that we have in Defender for Cloud, and the powerful capability that Azure policies offer, and make sure you take benefit of all of these. Now, this is all great. Now, if you think of any security program, it has multiple workflows for incident response. Like, for example, you might need to notify your stakeholders how you're doing in Secure Score. You might want to launch change management process, or you might want to apply, a specific remediation step. And you need an approval for that. So that's where workflow automation in Defender for Cloud will help you. So before I talk about workflow automation, I want to briefly touch upon the continuous export that Yuri already briefly spoke about in his session. So Defender for Cloud natively integrates with Microsoft Sentinel, with Azure's cloud native SIEM and SOAR solutions. Like you may know, Sentinel has built-in connectors for Defender for Cloud at subscription and tenant level. You can enable that connector, and you can get the alerts ingested to Sentinel. And we also recently released a capability called bi-directional alert synchronization, which will kind of help you to automatically sync the status of original alerts, Defender for Cloud alerts, with Sentinel incidents that contain the copies of these alerts. So for example, when Microsoft Sentinel incident that contains Defender for Cloud alert is closed, Defender for Cloud will automatically closes the corresponding original alert. This way, you don't have to do the back and forth thing to close the alerts. So that has been a very much loved feature. If you're not using it already, make sure you take benefit out of it. So with the help of continuous export in Defender for Cloud, we are helping you to export your recommendations, alerts, vulnerability findings, compliance data, and all of these you can export it to either Event Hub or to a log analytics workspace or to any third-party SIM and even to Azure Data Explorer or any tool of your choice. So by doing that, you have all the data in one of the locations that you have choose to export here. And, with the help of which you can use automations like KQL, and you can extract the data that you want. You can use APIs, and you can program it, and you can review the reports and probably create a stakeholder report as well with the help of that feature. Very powerful capability. If you're not using it already, highly recommend you to use it. Now, talking about the workflow automation in the Defender for Cloud, this will help you, you can trigger logic apps on security alerts, on recommendations, and if you have changes to your regulatory compliance. For example, I might want Defender for Cloud to send me an email to a specific user when an alert occurs. Furthermore, taking a step further, you may want Defender for Cloud to stop that threat, spread to the next stage of cybersecurity kill chain, or spread that alert into your environment. So you may want Defender for Cloud to auto remediate your affected resource. So things like those are absolutely possible with the help of workflow automation. All you do is let me actually take you to the portal. Here you go. Now, by going into the environment settings or choosing the subscription, or you could go to the workflow automation. Here you see that I have pre-populated some logic apps in my subscriptions. And here I would give the description of the subscription logic app, but let me take a step back. And when I go to click on the workflow automation from this page, I'll be able to create new automation rules. I could when it decides to load, you can enable, disable, or existing ones from the screen here. But here, when this screen loads, you'll be able to add a workflow automation. It will give you options, to add a description, to add the name of the automation, and you can set up when I want this workflow automation to be triggered. Okay, now let me take this an example. So in this one, this is a logic app that I have created. The status, though it says it's disabled, here in the screen I'll be able to see if the logic app is enabled or disabled, and for which scope that I have created, and what is the trigger type. Have I assigned it to a recommendation, or have assigned it to a security alert, and the description that I choose to write. And this is the logic app that is working in the backend in order for this specific recommendation, right? So apologize for it not being loading, but here looks like I have some access issues, but the logic app pretty much will give you capability, to define the logic of what you want that logic app to be able to do. You want to remediate the alert, you want to remediate a recommendation, and so on and so forth. And Yeah, so this is a powerful capability within the workflow automation. And let me show you one other cool thing that you can use. Within the Azure policies, we do have a specific policy called Deploy Workflow Automation for Microsoft Defender for Cloud recommendations. And when you assign that, you will notice yeah. So deploy workflow automation for Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Regulatory compliance is one of the examples, and you will have you'll notice that there are several recommendations for recommendations and for the alerts as well. So you will notice that in this screen, if you look at the policy definition, you will notice that what this does is this is going to be like deploying the workflow automation for the Defender for Cloud recommendations to start with. And I could assign this and I could provide it to a specific scope and define the parameters and remediation and define a non-compliance message and so on. So this will give me a capability that I could automatically and I could configure the workflow automation at scale. So this is another powerful feature that you can use, to play around with the workflow automations and to use the workflow automations capability within the Defender for Cloud. Okay. Moving on, until now we have learned about policies and governance and all the great things. I hope we came out pretty loud and clear. Understanding the current state of your environment is the first step towards improving your security posture, and Defender for Cloud helps you do just that. Like Yuri mentioned earlier, it's designed to strengthen three pillars every enterprise relies on, which is protection, detection, and response. Now, I want to introduce you to a workbook if you haven't seen it already and using it already. It's called our Policy Distribution Workbook. For a while, we did not have a single view with which you can visualize all the policies that you have assigned to monitor compliance of your environment. You had to browse through many different blades in Azure to access and obtain this information, and sometimes the lags that you would see in the portal, just like how you saw in my demo. So it can get really intimidating when you actually are, trying to remediate a recommendation. So this workbook here will help you provide a unified view, and it'll give you deep visibility into the configuration of your overall policy structure in Azure. You will notice that it will have different sections like initiatives that you have assigned to your subscriptions, what are all the recommendations that you have assigned that Defender for Cloud has identified, and what are all the recommendations that you have exempted. And if you have any recommendation that you have policy disabled, you'll notice that as well. Many of the customers these days love to have custom policies. You can see the list of custom policies as well in this workbook. You will notice how you are doing in terms of regulatory compliance state, and policies by effect and compliance by policy assignment. Let me show you the coolness. Let me take you to the portal and take you to the Defender for Cloud and take you to the workbook section. And by the way, this workbook is not inbuilt to the portal yet, but we are looking for more feedback from you guys. If this is more useful for you, we will be happy to inbuilt it within the portal. But for now, you'll have to go to the GitHub repository in order to be able to upload this workbook in your environment. And like here, once you have uploaded this or downloaded this workbook to your environment, you'll be able to see all the details that I just mentioned about in a single pane of glass. These are all the initiatives that I have in my subscription. These are all the exempted recommendations and the policy off by policy, the policies that I have used to, disable. This is a list of custom policies that I have in my subscription. When you expand this, you'll be able to see more information on what this policy is about. And I could click on the deep link, which will eventually take me to the Azure policy blade and gives me more information about this particular policy. And regulatory compliance assessment state will tell me how I'm doing in terms of the regulatory compliance. So talks to me about each compliance specifically that I have in my environment, and if it is passed or failed, how many skipped resources, passed resources, and so on. And finally, policies by effect. How many policies in my subscription do I have? Modify effect, audit effect, deploy if not exist, or audit if not exist, and so on, right? So all of these, I'll be able to see it in one single pane of glass. I could scroll down further to see, per subscription level or for all the subscriptions. We have a hyperlink here that, you can use further if you want to provide any feedback or feedbacks of improvement, or if you like it or not, or what more you want to see in this workbook. Please make sure you utilize this and give us the feedback so that we can do much better job. Okay, so yeah. So this is about the policy distribution workbook. Make sure you go to our GitHub repository. I'm sure one of my wonderful colleagues will put that in the chat window, the link to the GitHub repository, and then deploy it and then make use of it. So that's all from us for today. I hope this session was helpful and you understand and acknowledge the importance of your governance in your environment. We are leaving you with some additional resources for the documentations. Make sure you visit these videos where we interview the product teams to talk about the new upcoming feature or the feature that's already, in GA. And here is our Ninja training and certificate. Make sure you take it and then be Ninja certified for Defender for Cloud. And make sure you follow our tech community blog where we release the amazing blogs to educate you, to give you more clarity on pricing and whatnot, right? Everything related to Defender for Cloud. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation today. I would like to remind everyone that our next Microsoft Defender for Cloud webinar will be on how to ensure maximum security posture for your government cloud environment and how to protect it using Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That's on August 4th, and you can register for that webinar at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And once again, I'd like to thank Yuri and Safeena for being our guests today. Looks like we do have 2 questions. Oh, we do have 1 question here we can answer. So we have a question: how to export recommendations in Excel so that we can send the same to concerned team like SQL?
You can do that via Azure Resource Graph. So when you go to the recommendations page, if you want to export everything that is open on the recommendations, you can just click on Open Query button, and from there you open Azure Resource Graph. You can refine the query from there and then download the CSV directly from there. That's one option, because there is other options to download the CSV directly, but the advantage of going through the Azure Resource Graph is that you can customize more, right? There is an option to download the CSV directly, by the way, in the dashboard. But if you want to customize the query, you can open in Resource Graph and then from there download the CSV.
Thank you, Yuri. So once again, thank you, Yuri and Safeena, for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. Thank you, and see you next time. Goodbye.